The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the massive chamber. Some floated in special tanks filled with glowing liquid. Others stood on tall platforms that reached toward the crystal dome ceiling. The air buzzed with the sounds of 100 different languages being translated by the central computer system. At the center of it all was something that made most delegates look away in disgust. Empress. Hanavel hung suspended in a shimmering energy field. She was enormous. Her body stretched 200 meters from nose to tail. Her shape reminded many of the ancient dragons from human fairy tales, but she was made of what looked like living crystal. Her scales should have been beautiful and clear like diamonds. Instead, they were covered completely by millions of small creatures that looked like ugly barnacles. The creatures made constant scraping sounds as they moved across her body. They clicked and scratched and whispered in ways that hurt the ears of most species. A thick smell filled the air around her. Containment field. It smelled like old seaweed and rotting fish mixed with something metallic that burned the nose. Most delegates kept their distance. Some held cloths over their breathing organs. Others had turned their backs entirely to avoid looking at the sight. Dong-hyun. Kim stood closer than anyone else dared to go. The young human scientist pressed his face almost against the energy barrier. His dark eyes studied every detail of the massive creature before him. While others saw only horror, Dong-hyun saw something different. He saw pain in the Empress's large blue eyes. He saw exhaustion in the way her great head drooped toward the floor. Behind him, his fellow human delegates whispered among themselves. Admiral Bo-Ram Lee stepped forward. She was a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight knot. Her military uniform was perfectly pressed, despite the long journey from Earth. "Kim, step away from that thing," she said quietly. "The smell alone could make you sick." Dong-hyun did not move. He kept watching the Empress. "She is dying," he said softly. "Good," muttered Cultural Minister Tae-ho Park. He was a thin man who kept wiping his nose with a cloth. "The sooner this nightmare ends, the better. No species in their right mind would bond with that creature." The sound of a great bell filled the chamber. All conversation stopped. The council speaker floated down from the highest platform. It was a vector which looked like a giant jellyfish made of blue light. When it spoke, its voice came from speakers. "Placed throughout the hall, delegates of the Galactic Council," the speaker announced. "We gather today for the 28th attempt to find asylum for Empress Hanavel of the destroyed world Tidal Prime. According to the ancient laws, any displaced royal must be granted sanctuary through the bonding ceremony. 27 species have declined this honor." A wave of uncomfortable shifting passed through the crowd. Some delegates made rude gestures. Others simply turned away. The speaker continued. "The Empress grows weaker with each passing day. If no species accepts the bond within 7 standard days, she will perish. This could mean war with her surviving colonies. 3 star systems hang in the balance." Dong-hyun felt something strange happen. As the speaker talked about the Empress dying, the barnacle-like creatures on her body began to glow softly. The light was pale blue and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. None of the other delegates seemed to notice this change. "The floor is now open for any species willing to undergo the bonding ceremony," the speaker announced. Silence filled the great hall. Not one delegate moved forward. Many actually stepped backward to show they wanted no part of this decision. Dong-hyun looked around at all the different species, the proud Zentari with their golden armor, the wise Okeani floating in their water, suits, the fierce Ragathi warriors with their sharp claws, all of them powerful, all of them advanced, all of them disgusted by what they saw before them. He turned back to look at the Empress. Her great eyes had closed. The blue glow from the creatures on her body was getting dimmer. She was giving up hope. That was when Dong-hyun noticed something. That would change everything. As he watched, one of the barnacle creatures turned toward him. It had no visible eyes, but somehow he knew it was looking directly at him. Then another turned his way. Then dozens. Soon, hundreds of the small creatures had oriented themselves toward the human scientist. They began to make new sounds, not the harsh scraping that hurt everyone's ears. These sounds were different, softer, almost like singing. The blue glow grew. Brighter around those that faced him. Admiral Lee grabbed his arm. "Kim, what are you doing? Step away from that force field right now." But Dong Hyun could not move. He was beginning to understand something that no one else in the Great Hall realized. These were not just ugly parasites covering the Empress. They were responding to him in a way they had never responded to any other species. "Admiral," he said, without taking his eyes off the Empress. "I need to speak with Earth Command immediately." "Absolutely not," Park interrupted. "Humanity will not be dragged into this mess. We are too new to the Council to take on such a burden." The speaker's voice boomed again. "The session will pause for 1 standard hour to allow final consultations. When we reconvene, if no species steps forward, the matter will be closed." As delegates began to file out of the chamber, Dong Hyun remained at the barrier. The Empress opened her eyes and looked directly at him. For a moment, human and alien stared at each other across the energy field. The barnacle creatures continued their soft singing. The blue light grew warmer and brighter. In that moment, Dong Hyun made a decision that would change the fate of 2 species forever. The human diplomatic ship floated silently in the shadow of the massive council station. Inside the main conference room, tension filled the air like thick smoke. Dong Hyun stood before a table of Earth's most important officials. His hands shook, slightly, as he prepared to make the most important argument of his life. Admiral Bo-Ram Lee sat at the head of the table. Her fingers drummed against the metal surface, making tiny clicking sounds. Cultural Minister Tae-ho Park sat to her right, still holding a cloth to his nose from earlier. The smell from the council chambers seemed to follow them everywhere. "Explain to me again why you think we should bond with that creature," Admiral Lee said. Her voice was cold and sharp. "Every other species in the galaxy has rejected it. Species that have been part of the Council for thousands of years. What makes you think humanity knows better?" Dong Hyun took a deep breath. He had prepared for this moment during the entire trip back to their ship. "Admiral, with respect, I think every other species is making a terrible mistake." Minister Park laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Did you see that thing? It is covered in parasites. It smells like death. The sounds those creatures make could drive anyone insane. How is rejecting that a mistake?" "Because they are not parasites," Dong Hyun said firmly. "I ran preliminary scans while we were in the chamber. Those organisms are not harming the Empress. They are helping her." He activated a holographic display above the table. Images of his scan results filled the air between them. The data showed energy patterns and biological readings that most people would find confusing. But Dong Hyun had spent years studying alien biology. "Look at these energy signatures," he said, pointing to glowing lines on the display. "The creatures are not draining her life force. They are enhancing it. Her brain activity is 30% higher than it should be for her species. Her physical strength readings are off the charts. These organisms are making her more than she would be alone." Admiral Lee leaned forward. "Even if that is true, it does not change the fact that they are disgusting. No human would want to be around something like that." "But that is exactly why we are perfect for this," Dong Hyun said with growing excitement. "Think about it, Admiral. Humans have always been different from other species when it comes to symbiotic relationships." He changed the holographic display to show images from Earth. Pictures of humans with their pets appeared in the air. Dogs and cats and birds and even stranger creatures that humans kept as companions. "Every other species thinks we are crazy for bonding with animals they consider ugly or useless," Dong Hyun continued. "The Zentari cannot understand why we keep dogs. The Okeani are horrified that we let cats live in our homes. But we see something they cannot see. We see the beauty in relationships that others find disgusting. Minister Park stood up from his chair. You are comparing that monster to a house cat? I am comparing our ability to see past surface appearances, Dong Hyun replied. Humans bond with bacteria in our stomachs. We need them to stay healthy. Other species think this is disgusting, but we understand that some relationships that look ugly on the outside are actually beautiful and necessary. Admiral Lee was quiet for a long moment. She stared at the holographic display showing the energy patterns from the Empress. What happened when you got close to the barrier? She asked suddenly. Dong Hyun felt his heart beat faster. Something. Incredible, Admiral. The creatures responded to me. They have never responded to any other species, but they turned toward me. They changed their sounds. They started glowing brighter. What do you think that means? I think it means they recognize something in humans that other species lack. Maybe it is our ability to form bonds with creatures others find repulsive. Maybe it is something else. But whatever it is, they want to connect with us. The room fell, silent. Through the large windows, they could see the council station in the distance. Somewhere inside that massive structure, Empress Hanavel waited for someone to save her life. Admiral Lee finally spoke. The political risks are enormous. If we take on this responsibility and something goes wrong, Earth could be blamed. We are still new to the Council. We cannot afford to make enemies. But Admiral, Dong Hyun said softly, what if we are missing the opportunity of a lifetime? What if those creatures hold secrets that could advance human science by centuries? What if the Empress becomes our greatest ally instead of our greatest burden? Minister Park shook his head. It is too dangerous. The smell alone would make it impossible to work with her. Humans have worked in sewers and garbage dumps and slaughterhouses, Dong Hyun replied. We adapt. We find ways to deal with things that other species cannot handle. That is what makes us human. Admiral Lee stood up and walked to the window. She stared out at the council station for a long time. When she finally turned back, her expression was thoughtful. If we agree to this, what would the bonding ceremony involve? Dong Hyun felt hope rise in his chest. According to council records, it is a symbolic joining, not marriage but a deep diplomatic bond. The person who undergoes the ceremony becomes responsible for the aliens' well-being and integration into their society. And you would be willing to undergo this ceremony? Yes, Admiral. I believe this is what humanity was meant to do. We were meant to see beauty where others see only horror. We were meant to form bonds that other species think are impossible. Admiral. Lee looked around the table at her advisors. Most of them shook their heads. The risks were real. The challenges would be enormous. But there was something in Dong Hyun's voice that made her think he might be right. Contact the council speaker, she said finally. Tell them humanity accepts the bonding proposal. The room erupted in surprised voices, but Admiral Lee held up her hand for silence. Dong Hyun, you better be right about this. If you are wrong, it could mean disaster for Earth. I am right, Admiral, he said with quiet confidence. I know I am right. As their ship turned back toward the council station, Dong Hyun felt his heart racing with excitement and fear. Soon he would stand before the Empress again. Soon he would discover if his theory about the creatures was correct. Soon humanity would either make its greatest mistake or achieve its greatest triumph. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been more crowded. Word of humanity's decision to accept the bonding ceremony had spread throughout the station like wildfire. Delegates who had left in disgust hours earlier now returned to witness what many believed would be a disaster. Dong Hyun stood at the edge of the containment field wearing ceremonial white robes. His hands trembled slightly, but his face showed calm determination. Behind him, Admiral Bo-Ram Lee and Minister Tae-ho. Park watched with worried expressions. Around the vast chamber, Thousands of alien beings pressed forward to get a better view. The council speaker floated down from its high platform. Its jellyfish-like form pulsed with blue and purple lights as it spoke. We gather to witness the ancient bonding ceremony between human representative Dong-Hyun Kim and Empress Hanavel of Tidal Prime. This ritual has not been performed in over 300 years. Let all present understand the gravity of this moment. Empress Hanavel hung motionless in her energy prison. The millions of barnacle-like creatures covering her crystal scales had grown quiet. Even their usual scraping and clicking sounds had stopped. Only their pale blue glow remained steady in the dimmed lighting of the chamber. The speaker continued its announcement. The bonding ceremony requires physical contact between the representatives of both species. The energy barrier will be lowered for exactly 60 seconds. If the bond is successful, both beings will be joined in diplomatic unity. If it fails, both may die. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Many delegates had not realized the ceremony carried such risks. Minister Park grabbed Admiral Lee's arm. "We have to stop this," he whispered urgently. "If Kim dies, Earth will be blamed for this disaster." Admiral Lee shook her head. "It is too late now. We gave our word." The speaker raised one of its glowing tentacles. "Human representative, are you prepared to proceed?" Dong-Hyun stepped forward. "I am ready." "Empress Hanavel, do you accept this bonding attempt?" The great dragon-like creature slowly lifted her massive head. When she spoke, her voice was like the sound of wind through underwater caves. The translation system made her words understandable to all present. "I accept," she said simply. "I am grateful beyond measure that someone finally sees past my cursed appearance." The energy barrier began to shimmer and fade. As it disappeared, the smell that had disgusted so many delegates grew stronger. Several beings in the crowd covered their breathing organs or moved further away, but Dong-Hyun stepped closer to the Empress. The barnacle creatures covering her body suddenly became active. They began moving across her crystal scales in complex patterns. Their blue glow grew brighter and started to pulse in rhythm like a heartbeat. The scraping sounds they made changed into something that almost sounded like music. Dong-Hyun reached out his hand toward the Empress's great snout. As he moved closer, the creatures turned to face him. Hundreds, then thousands of them oriented themselves toward the approaching human. Their glow became so bright that it lit up the entire chamber. "Incredible," whispered someone in the crowd. "They are responding to him." The moment Dong-Hyun's palm touched the warm crystal surface of the Empress's nose, something magical happened. The barnacle creatures burst into song. Not the harsh scraping sounds they had made before, but beautiful harmonic frequencies that resonated through the chamber like the voices of angels. The sound was so lovely that many delegates stopped trying to cover their ears and instead moved closer to hear better. The melody rose and fell in complex patterns that spoke of deep ocean currents and ancient wisdom. It was music unlike anything any species in the galaxy had ever heard. Empress Hanavel's eyes widened in surprise. "They sing," she whispered in wonder. "For the first time in months, my companions sing with joy instead of sorrow." Light began to flow between Dong-Hyun's hand and the Empress's scales. It started as a thin blue line, but quickly grew into streams of energy that connected human and alien. The light spread up Dong-Hyun's arm and across the Empress's body. Where it touched the barnacle creatures, their glow became even more brilliant. The crowd watched in amazement as the ceremony transformed from what they expected to be a disgusting spectacle into something beautiful, beyond imagination. The music from the creatures created harmonies that made many delegates weep with emotion they had never felt before. Dong-Hyun felt sensations flooding his mind that he had never experienced. Images of vast underwater cities filled his thoughts. He saw beings of living crystals swimming through coral forests that stretched to the horizon. He felt the memory of a dying star and the desperate evacuation of an entire world. "I see your pain," he said softly to the Empress. "I see your loss. but I also see hope. The streams of light connecting them pulsed brighter. The ceremony was working. The bond between human and alien was forming successfully. But something else was happening that no one had expected. The barnacle creatures began to detach themselves from the Empress's body, not falling off but carefully climbing down to form a bridge of living beings between Dong-hyun and Hanavel. As they moved, their song grew more complex and beautiful. "What are they doing?" Admiral Lee asked in wonder. The council speaker floated closer. Its own lights pulsed with amazement. "This has never happened before. The symbiotic organisms are participating directly in the bonding ritual." As the creatures formed their living bridge, Dong-hyun felt new knowledge filling his mind. These were not simple parasites or even advanced symbionts. They were something far more incredible. Each one contained memories and experiences that stretched back thousands of years. They were repositories of knowledge from the lost civilization of Tidal Prime. The bonding ceremony reached its climax as the last streams of light connected all three parts of this impossible triangle. Human brain, alien consciousness, and preserved civilization joined together in a union that would change the galaxy forever. When the light finally faded, Dong-hyun stood transformed. His eyes now held flecks of the same blue glow that came from the creatures. The Empress looked more alive than she had in months, and the barnacle beings continued their joyous song as they slowly returned to their positions on her crystal scales. "The bonding is complete," announced the speaker. "Humanity has accepted guardianship of Empress Hanavel and her companions." But as the cheers and gasps of amazement filled the great hall, Dong-hyun realized that they had gotten far more than they bargained for. The creatures covering the Empress were not just alien life forms. They were the living memory of an entire civilization, and now that civilization had chosen humanity as their partners in survival. 3 weeks after the bonding ceremony, the massive human transport ship New Horizon moved slowly through space toward the Sol system. In its specially built cargo bay, Empress Hanavel rested in a tank of artificial seawater that kept her comfortable during the long journey. The barnacle creatures covering her body glowed softly in the dim blue lighting that reminded them of their lost ocean world. Dong-hyun spent most of his time floating beside the tank in a diving suit. The changes from the bonding ceremony had altered him in ways that scientists back on Earth were eager to study. He could now hold his breath for over an hour. His eyes had adapted to see clearly in the dark depths of the tank. Most remarkably, he could sense the electromagnetic fields that the creatures used to communicate with each other. Dr. So-young Choi, the ship's lead marine biologist, swam beside him taking readings with her waterproof instruments. She had volunteered. For this assignment, despite warnings from her colleagues that studying such disgusting creatures would ruin her career. "The symbiotic organisms are definitely not parasites," she reported to Dong-hyun through their underwater communication system. "Every scan I run shows they are providing benefits to the Empress. Enhanced neural activity, increased physical strength, better healing capabilities. It is like they are upgrading her biology." Dong-hyun nodded as he watched the creatures move across the Empress's crystal scales. Since the bonding ceremony, their behavior had changed dramatically. Instead of the random movements they had shown before, they now moved in organized patterns that looked almost like a language. "I think they are trying to tell us something," he said. "Watch how they form shapes on her left side when she is thinking, and see how they cluster around her head when she is trying to communicate." Above them, in the tank's control room, engineer Woo Jin-han monitored the life support systems. He had designed the mobile habitat in record time, working 18-hour days to make sure everything would keep the Empress healthy during the journey. Despite his success, he still found the sight of the massive alien disturbing. "I do not understand how you two can spend so much time in the water with that thing," he said over the communication system. "The smell alone makes me sick." Dr. Choi smiled behind her diving mask. "You get used to it. Besides, I think the smell is getting better." Maybe the creatures are adapting to human preferences. What she did not know was that she was exactly right. The barnacle creatures had been slowly altering their chemical emissions ever since the bonding ceremony. They were learning to produce scents that humans would find pleasant instead of disgusting. As the days passed during their journey to Earth, strange things began to happen. Dong-hyun found himself understanding more and more of what the creatures were trying to communicate. He began to realize that each cluster of organisms had its own personality and memories. Some were curious about humans and pressed close to the glass of his diving helmet. Others seemed shy and hid behind the Empresses, larger scales. The most remarkable discovery came when Dong-hyun was floating near the Empress's head during one of her rest periods. A small group of creatures had formed what looked like symbols on her forehead. As he studied the patterns, he suddenly understood what they meant. "Dr. Choi," he called excitedly. "Come here quickly. I think they are showing us writing." So Young swam over to see what had captured his attention. The creatures had arranged themselves into complex geometric shapes that pulsed with different colors of light. "What do you think it means?" she asked. Dong-hyun concentrated on the patterns. Ever since the bonding ceremony, he had been developing an intuitive understanding of the creatures' communication methods. "I think they are telling us their names." "Names? You mean individual names?" "Yes. Each cluster of organisms has its own identity. They are not just a collective mass. They are individuals who happen to be living together on the Empress's body." This revelation changed everything about how the human team understood their passenger. What they had thought was one alien creature covered by parasites was actually thousands of individual beings living in cooperation. Over the following days, Dong-hyun worked with Dr. Choi to catalog different groups of creatures and learn their individual characteristics. They discovered that some specialized in memory storage, while others focused on communication. Some seemed to be engineers who helped maintain the Empress's body, while others appeared to be artists who created the beautiful light patterns during emotional moments. "This is incredible," Dr. Choi reported to Earth during their daily status update. "We are not just bringing home one alien refugee. We are bringing home an entire civilization." The response from Earth was mixed. Some officials were excited about the potential for learning from such advanced beings. Others worried about the challenges of accommodating thousands of individual aliens instead of just one. Admiral Bo-Ram Lee's voice crackled over the communication system during one of their regular briefings. "Kim, what exactly are we going to do with all these creatures when you reach Earth? Our plans were based on housing one large alien, not managing a whole population." Dong-hyun floated in the tank, looking up at the communication screen. "Admiral, I think they want to stay with the Empress. They are not looking for separate homes. They are looking for a place where they can all live together safely." "And what about the Empress herself? How is she handling the journey?" "She is doing much better, Admiral. The creatures seem happier now that they know they are going somewhere they will be welcome. Their improved mood is helping her recover from months of depression and malnutrition." What Dong-hyun did not tell the Admiral was that Empress Hanavel had been sharing her own memories with him through their bond. He had learned that her world had been destroyed not by a natural disaster, but by something far more sinister. The knowledge was too dangerous to discuss over open communication channels. As Earth grew larger in the ship's viewports, the creatures covering the Empress became more active. Their bioluminescent displays grew brighter and more complex. They seemed excited about reaching their new home. "They can sense we are almost there," Dong-hyun observed to Dr. Choi. "I think they are preparing for something." Preparing for what? Before he could answer, the water around them suddenly filled with the most beautiful music any human had ever heard. Every creature on the Empress's body was singing in perfect harmony. The sound was so lovely that crew members throughout the ship stopped their work to listen. Engineer Woo Jin, who had spent weeks complaining about the smell and the disturbing appearance of their passengers, found himself wiping tears from his eyes as he listened to the alien song. "What are they singing about?" Dr. Choi asked in wonder. Dong-Yun closed his eyes and let the bonding ceremony's connection guide his understanding of their music. "They are singing about hope," he said softly. "They are singing about finding a new family among the stars." As Earth filled the viewport and the creatures continued their song of joy, Dong-Hyun realized that bringing them home was only the beginning. The real challenge would be helping them build a new life while keeping safe the dangerous secrets they carried from their destroyed world. But for now, as he floated in the artificial ocean, listening to the music of an alien civilization, he felt nothing but excitement for what the future might bring. The floating city of New Tidal rose from the Pacific Ocean like something from a dream. Massive bioengineered structures grew up from the seafloor, connected by bridges that swayed gently with the waves. At the center of it all was the largest artificial lagoon ever constructed, where Empress Hanavel could swim freely for the first time in months. 6 months had passed since their arrival on Earth. The project to build a suitable home for the Empress and her companions had challenged human engineering in ways no one had expected, but the results were beyond anything the planners had imagined. Dr. So-Young Choi stood on one of the floating platforms, watching the Empress glide through the deep blue water below. The massive crystal dragon moved with grace and power that took her breath away. Since arriving on Earth, Hanavel had grown stronger and more beautiful every day. Her scales now shimmered with rainbow colors instead of the dull gray they had been during her imprisonment. "She looks so much happier," said engineer Woo Jin Han, who stood beside her. His attitude toward their alien guests had changed completely over the past months. Working closely with the creatures covering the Empress had shown him their incredible intelligence and gentle nature. "The creatures are happier too," So-Young replied. "Look at how they move now." The barnacle-like organisms covering the Empress's body now moved in flowing patterns that looked like underwater dances. Their bioluminescent displays created art across her crystal scales that changed constantly as they expressed different emotions and ideas. Dong-Hyun floated in the lagoon wearing his advanced diving gear. The changes from the bonding ceremony had continued to develop over the months. He could now stay underwater for hours at a time, and his understanding of the creature's communication had grown incredibly sophisticated. As he swam beside the Empress, a small group of creatures detached from her body and floated toward him. This was something new that had started happening recently. Individual clusters would leave the Empress temporarily to interact directly with humans before returning to their positions on her scales. The floating creatures formed shapes in the water around Dong-Hyun's helmet. Through his enhanced connection, he understood they were asking about the progress on a special project they had been working on together. "Not yet," he told them, using a combination of gestures and electromagnetic pulses they had taught him. "The equipment is not ready." What the creatures wanted was something that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. They wanted to try temporarily bonding with human volunteers to see if the symbiotic relationship could work between species. Several humans had volunteered for the experiment, including Dong-Hyun himself. Dr. Min Seo-jung had arrived from Seoul 3 weeks earlier to oversee the project. She was one of Earth's leading experts on consciousness transfer and neural interfaces. Her mobile laboratory floated on a platform near the main habitat. "The preliminary tests are promising," she reported to the team during their daily briefing. "The creatures produce neural interface compounds that are compatible with human brain chemistry. In small doses, they might be able to create temporary connections without permanent changes." The first volunteer for the experiment was a Marine, researcher named Yoonji Park. She had been working with the creatures for months and had developed a strong bond with a cluster that specialized in underwater navigation. The creatures had shown interest in sharing their abilities with her. "Are you sure about this?" So-Young asked, as Yoonji prepared for the test. "We have no idea what the long-term effects might be. Yunji smiled confidently. The creatures have been nothing but helpful since we arrived. I trust them. Besides, think of what we might learn. The experiment took place in a special chamber Dr. Jung had designed. Yunji lay on a floating platform while a small group of creatures carefully positioned themselves on her arms and shoulders. They glowed softly as they made contact with her skin. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then Yunji's eyes widened with amazement. "I can feel the ocean currents," she whispered. "I can sense the electromagnetic fields of every living thing in the lagoon. This is incredible." The test lasted only 30 minutes, but the results were beyond anything the team had hoped for. Yunji had gained temporary enhanced senses that allowed her to navigate underwater with perfect precision. More importantly, she had experienced sharing consciousness with alien beings without losing her own identity. "They are not trying to control or change us," she reported excitedly. "They want to share what they know. They want to teach us." News of the successful experiment spread throughout the floating city. More volunteers came forward wanting to try the symbiotic bonding. Engineer Hyunwoo Kim discovered that bonding with creatures who specialized in mathematics allowed him to solve complex engineering problems at superhuman speed. But the most important development came when Dong-hyun underwent a deeper bonding with a creature cluster that had been trying to communicate something urgent for weeks. As the creatures made contact with his nervous system, Dong-hyun suddenly found his mind filled with memories that were not his own. He saw images of the Empresses, homeworld Tidal Prime in its final days. He witnessed the arrival of massive alien warships and the use of weapons that turned their sun into a black hole. When the bonding session ended, Dong-hyun was shaking with the horror of what he had seen. "Dr. Choi," he called urgently. "Get Admiral Lee on the communication link immediately. We need to talk to Earth Command right away." "What is it?" So-young asked with concern. "Tidal Prime was not destroyed by a natural disaster," Dong-hyun said grimly. "It was murdered, and the same beings who destroyed the Empress's world are still out there." As the team prepared to send their urgent message to Earth, the creatures covering Empress Hanavel began to glow brighter than they ever had before. They had finally found beings who could understand the terrible truth they had been carrying. The truth about an enemy that threatened every free civilization in the galaxy. The Empress herself seemed to sense that the moment of revelation had finally arrived. She swam to the surface of the lagoon and raised her great head toward the floating platforms where the humans worked. "My new friends," she said in her voice like distant thunder. "The time has come to share the burden I have carried alone for so long. The beings who destroyed my world call themselves the hegemony, and they will not stop until every advanced civilization in the galaxy serves them or dies." As the implications of this revelation sank in, the humans of New Tidal realized that their act of kindness in saving the Empress had made them targets of the most dangerous force in the galaxy. But they also realized they now possessed something that could change the balance of power forever. They had the memories and knowledge of a civilization that had fought the hegemony and learned their secrets. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin, and humanity had just chosen sides. 1 year had passed since the truth about the hegemony was revealed. The floating city of New Tidal had grown into something that amazed visitors from across the galaxy. What had started as a simple refuge for one alien refugee had become the most advanced research facility in human space. Dong-hyun floated in the Great Lagoon beside Empress Hanavel, watching as dozens of human volunteers worked alongside the symbiotic creatures. The partnerships had evolved far beyond anyone's expectations. Humans enhanced with creature abilities could now breathe underwater for hours, work in the crushing depths of the ocean, and communicate through bioelectric fields. The changes in Dong-hyun himself were remarkable. 3 creatures had permanently bonded with him after months of careful preparation. The small beings lived in special biosuits integrated with his nervous system. They enhanced his thinking speed, allowed him to process vast amounts of information, and gave him abilities that made him invaluable as Earth's primary alien diplomat. "The Council representatives will arrive within the hour," reported Dr. So Young, Choi through the underwater communication system. She swam nearby, monitoring the final preparations for what would be the most important meeting in galactic history. Empress Hanavel's massive form glided through the water with graceful power. The symbiotic creatures covering her body now numbered in the millions again. Word of the sanctuary on Earth had spread, and creatures from other destroyed worlds had somehow found their way to New Tidal. Each new arrival brought memories and knowledge from civilizations the hegemony had eliminated. "Are you ready for this?" Dong-hyun asked the Empress through their bonded connection. "I have been ready for this moment since my world died," she replied. Her mental voice carried determination mixed with hope. "For too long, the hegemony has hidden their crimes behind lies and fear. Today, we show the galaxy the truth." Above them, on the floating platforms, delegates from 47 species had gathered. The meeting had been arranged in secret after months of careful diplomatic work. Many of the aliens present had initially come to see the disgusting human experiment with the barnacle-covered dragon. What they found instead challenged everything they thought they knew about symbiotic relationships and cooperation between species. Admiral Bo-Ram Lee stood at the main platform overlooking the lagoon. Her expression was serious but confident. The past year had transformed Earth from a minor member of the Galactic Council into a major power. The technology developed through human-Tidali cooperation had produced advances that other species were eager to trade for. "Delegates of the Galactic Council," she announced. "You have come here today to witness something unprecedented. The evidence we are about to share will change how you see the recent destruction of 17 star systems." A holographic display activated above the lagoon, showing a map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated worlds that had been destroyed over the past century. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Advanced civilizations had been systematically eliminated, while less developed species were allowed to survive. Dong-hyun rose from the lagoon wearing his biosuit that integrated. The three symbiotic creatures bonded to him. The aliens in the crowd gasped as they saw how the parasites they had once found disgusting now worked in perfect harmony with human biology. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the water. "What you are about to hear comes from the living memories of civilizations the hegemony thought they had completely destroyed." The creatures covering Empress Hanavel began to glow in complex patterns. The bioluminescent display told a story that had been hidden for decades. Images appeared in the light showing massive hegemony fleets arriving at peaceful worlds. The aliens had a simple message for every advanced civilization they encountered: submit to hegemony rule or face complete annihilation. Species that refused were not simply conquered. They were eliminated so completely that no trace of their technology or culture remained. The hegemony made it look like natural disasters or civil wars had destroyed these worlds. Only a few survivors, like the creatures bonded to Empress Hanavel, carried the truth of what had really happened. The hegemony has been committing genocide across the galaxy for over 200 years, Dong-hyun continued. They eliminate any species that might challenge their dominance while keeping the rest of us divided and weak. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd of delegates. Many had suspected something was wrong with the pattern of destroyed worlds, but no one had concrete evidence until now. Dr. Min Seo-jung activated another display showing recent technological developments at New Tidal. Ships that could regenerate, damage using biotechnology, weapons that disabled attackers without killing them. Most importantly, communication networks that could not be intercepted or jammed by conventional methods. The partnership between humanity and the Tidali survivors has produced defensive capabilities the hegemony cannot counter, she explained. But these technologies only work through cooperative symbiotic relationships. They cannot be stolen or copied by force. This was the key to everything. The hegemony's power came from taking what they wanted from conquered species. But the biotechnological advances developed at New Tidal required willing cooperation between different forms of life. It was something the hegemony's philosophy of domination made impossible for them to achieve. Empress Hanavel rose to the surface of the lagoon. Her massive form sparkled with the lights of millions of symbiotic creatures. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of ancient royalty combined with the wisdom of survival. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," she said, "the hegemony believes that strength comes from conquest and submission. They are wrong. True strength comes from cooperation and mutual support. Humanity has shown us this truth." She gestured toward the platforms where humans and various alien species worked side by side. "Look around you. See what becomes possible when different forms of life choose to help each other instead of trying to dominate." The demonstration that followed amazed the delegates. Human Tidali teams showed off technology that seemed like magic. Underwater cities that grew themselves from living coral. Ships that could think and adapt to changing conditions. Most impressively, communication networks that connected minds across vast distances without any loss of individual identity. "We offer this partnership to any species willing to stand against the hegemony," Admiral Lee announced. "But understand that this is not about human leadership or alien submission. This is about creating something new together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Delegates from species across the galaxy stepped forward to volunteer their worlds as partners in the new alliance. They had seen what cooperation could achieve, and they wanted to be part of it. But the most moving moment came when ships began, arriving in Earth's outer system. These were not council delegates or hegemony forces. They were refugees. Word had somehow spread that Earth was a place where the survivors of destroyed worlds could find sanctuary. The first ship carried crystalline beings from a world the hegemony had eliminated 30 years earlier. The second brought liquid-based life forms whose ocean planet had been boiled away. Ship after ship arrived carrying the scattered remnants of civilizations everyone thought were extinct. "They are coming home," Dong-hyun said softly as he watched. The refugee ships dock at New Tidal's expanded facilities. The symbiotic creatures bonded to him pulsed with emotion that matched his own. Empress Hanavel's eyes glowed with tears of joy. "For the first time since my world died, I am not alone in carrying the memory of the lost. We are building something the hegemony never expected. We are building hope." As the sun set over New Tidal, the floating city sparkled with lights from a dozen different species working together. Humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had looked at what others considered disgusting and seen beauty. They had taken what others thought was impossible and made it real. The war against the hegemony would not be easy. But for the first time in centuries, the forces of freedom had something their enemies could never understand or defeat. They had the power of cooperation. They had the strength that came from choosing to help each other instead of trying to dominate. And at the center of it all floated Empress Hanavel, surrounded by millions of living memories, singing songs of hope for a galaxy that had finally found the courage to stand together against the darkness.